Welcome, Chris.
All right, good
How
morning.
are you doing?
I'm still landing. I got here pretty early this morning, but
We have Chris Wright on 3 hours sleep. His flight, it was late and it was delayed and he got in at like 1 a.m. or something, so a hotel at 2:30, who knows what. So if you fall asleep on stage, we'll wake you up. It's all good.
Sounds good.
Give us a brief intro to Chris Wright.
Well, I am CTO for Red Hat, and in that role, I focus on technology strategy and really helping define our vision, make sure we're staying in touch with emerging technologies and trends, really focusing on an enterprise customer base. My personal background, I've been in the computer world for quite some time. I'm a developer, and a lot of what I focus on is open source. And so I'm an open source developer at heart, and that really defines a lot of how I look at the world and how we operate with our partners and customers and other developers.
Excellent. Maybe a quick poll of the room here. Who here knows about Red Hat, maybe use their products, maybe purchase their services? We've got a bunch of hands down there and over here. Excellent. Very, very cool. Talk about a little bit about the journey of Red Hat. It's kind of interesting for me because I bought your CDs like 15 years ago.
Right.
And the company has changed. But talk a little bit about those early stages and how the company has grown and changed.
Well, in the beginning, we really had a fundamentally different business model. We were a shrink-wrapped packaged set of CDs. You'd get in a magazine. It was sort of get a T-shirt, get a hat, and aimed at a market, go to Best Buy, $99 kind of buy a CD and put that on your computer and run with it. Over time, we switched to an enterprise-focused business model, and that was a very significant change. Different end customer, a lot of different internal processes for what we had to do to produce that product. And then starting, I'd say about 13, 14 years ago, we began to expand our product portfolio. And so we started off as a company focused 100% on Linux, an operating system, and today we have a whole broad portfolio of products that are storage related, cloud related, automation, management. We really have increased the scope of our business substantially with a continued focus on the enterprise. And that, I think, really defines who we are. We've had to change a lot internally, and we've certainly grown a lot. And there's a lot of interesting, I guess, lessons learned in that journey.
How's the brand change as you evolve from that? I mean, it's still Red Hat. There's still a Red Hat. But how has the brand changed as you've evolved and grown beyond that initial package?
I think the brand, we've done a lot to preserve our brand identity. Now, the challenge has been not being perceived as a Linux-only company. So our brand identity is about trusted, it's about stability, it's about enterprise, mission-critical workloads. And a lot is wrapped up in open source. All the development we do is through open source communities. That trusted partner and collaborator, which is true to our open source spirits, has been the core message that we try to keep hammering on. But in there, we also have to keep clear with our customer base and the industry at large that our focus is not just on Linux. It's this broader hybrid cloud platform and collection of tools and that whole suite. So keeping true to who we are while increasing our portfolio has been kind of the magic balance. And we just did a change in our logo, which has been an interesting process because we did that as an open process.
Right.
We took input from the world, and it's a fairly subtle change. So, but it was an interesting process.
Is it one of those changes where you pay a consultant like $20 million and then in the end it sort of changes color or something like that, or not?
Still
quite?
red. Still red. But yeah, we got some feedback. So our logo is interesting. Our logo is a red hat with what we call shadow man, so kind of a private eye look. And we got some feedback that when you go global, that can have this kind of negative view. It's like secret and nefarious. And that certainly isn't what we're trying to achieve. And so really the change ultimately is the red hat without the shadow man.
Excellent, excellent. Now, a lot of people in the room are founders. They've had to pivot. Not saying exactly that Red Hat has pivoted, but definitely you've changed focus. And as you've gone from a consumer focus to an enterprise focus, that has huge impacts on marketing specifically and on sales specifically, including building out a sales organization. Can you talk about that a little bit and how that went?
Well, for one thing, when you're doing that kind of shrink wrap thing, your outlets are relatively small, so you have a very small set of customers. If we just fast forward to beginning at an enterprise business, which would be early 2000s to now, the types of changes we've had to make is, in one, just scaling the organization and thinking differently about how we engage with customers. So in the early stages, we would invest a tremendous amount of time with a key set of lighthouse customers to really establish ourselves in a space. And through some of that's the marketing messages associated with it. A lot of it is just feet on the ground and direct connections with customers. As we scale, we have to maintain the integrity of how we relate to the customer, but also realize that we can't spend all of our time with a small set of customers. So the challenge, I think, has been, one, just scaling the business itself, getting more people and preserving the culture, which is a huge challenge, and it's critical to the success of a business, I think, and maintaining who you are, your identity, and getting the message out, working through channels, creating different routes to market that don't put you as the bottleneck at all points in time has been the set of growing pains. And in fact, the acquisition with IBM gives us an opportunity to scale even more. So we've been on this journey of scaling, and now we just became part of a huge organization with a huge sales force and a huge services force that will really now enable us to reach further out into the customer base.
Yeah, and one of the things that you've done as you've built out and scaled is that you become a software as a service, doing a lot of SaaS offerings and other things like that. Talk to us about some of the challenges that you faced in doing that and building out that model and in scaling that model.
The number one challenge was finding talent that knows how to run software as a service. We have been producing products, and it's a different mindset. When you're producing something that's consumed as a service, you're running it, you have site reliability engineers that are on call 24/7, keeping the thing up and running. Our own internal engineers that are developing essentially the product that goes into the software as a service need to take on some empathy for the operations experience. And that's a whole set of changes that just takes time. There's also some business differences between a traditional software subscription model and software as a service model. So making sure we understand the business balance and the financial terms so that it doesn't adversely affect our margins and revenue growth and all that. So a bunch of different things we had to balance. But I think the number one challenge was finding the talent to really operate a service. It's legitimate hard work.
Right. And the customer experience is vastly different between getting something, opening it, installing it, using it, versus having this ongoing relationship over time, right? And really challenging to keep that going. You talked a little bit about scaling. You mentioned the acquisition by IBM, and that's going to help you scale more. What are the new challenges? You've been with the company a long time. From very small roots to growth, and so you've scaled already to significant size. What are the challenges of scaling now as you're already massive?
There's a kind of a compounding interest type of challenge, which is if you look, we were a publicly traded company until just in July, and so you create a relationship with Wall Street, set of expectations around growth and margins, and 10% growth on $100 looks quite different than 10% growth on $1 million or $1 billion. And so finding the way to continue to sustain that growth gets more and more challenging. And then again, the scaling aspect of growing the business, we were really looking at the number of people that we'd have to hire. You think, how can we hire that many people? It turns out on average to be multiple people a day that you're hiring. And how do you do new hire orientations? And critical part of this is maintaining that culture. And if you think about where we were in the beginning, we had a lot of access to talent that just intrinsically understood open source development and the kind of community mindset, because that's where we drew from. But eventually you kind of tap out that space, and you need to grow new talent and kind of, you know, get them on board with this cultural mindset. And that's hard work. And you know, you risk losing your cultural identity.
It's amazing to me that a fast-growing company, one of the core competencies that it has to have is onboarding new talent. I mean, that's not necessarily serving the customer, that's not necessarily building the product, that's not necessarily any of the core functions that you typically think of a company that they have to do well to succeed, but they've got to scale the company in terms of headcount. That's challenging because it's not something traditionally that companies have seen as a core competency.
No, we were looking at a plan to reach a $5 billion revenue stream, and that required us to more than double the size of our business. And in order to do that, when you include some natural attrition across your employee base, the number of people we had to hire was staggering over the course of
How staggering? What was the number?
Our plan was growing to something like 20,000 people. We were a little under 10,000, and with that growth and attrition, it looked like 13 or 15,000 people we'd have to hire over the course of a couple of years. You do the math, it's like that's a lot of people that you're onboarding. And
wow. It's
a whole different mindset. I mean, we have internal recruiters and all of that stuff, but it becomes. I felt there was a period of time in my life where I felt like about 6 or 12 months, all I did was interview people. Just interview.
I've been in a couple startups where we've done something like that. We tried to double our growth in headcount, and the amount of time you spend in interviewing, unbelievable. And I really felt like it took away from my focus in doing what I was supposed to actually be doing. Let's talk about the type of organization Red Hat is. It's kind of relevant in terms of your growth. You practice what's an open organization, open org. Can you explain what that is?
Well, I'd say that the term is coined by Jim Whitehurst, who's our CEO. He wrote a book called The Open Organization, and that describes Red Hat. I would say the open organization is really reflective of our development model, which is working with open source communities, building software products derived from those open source communities. And an open source community development practice is really flat, so it's not a lot of hierarchy. Good ideas can come from anywhere. It's fueled by healthy debate, and it's focused on the technical excellence of the project. And I think we mirror that a lot internally. I mean, in some areas it might not be quite as obvious if you're not writing code, but the way we operate internally is open, it's collaborative. There is plenty of spirited debate. We have a lot of very passionate people who are there on a mission, and harnessing all of that energy without a traditional kind of plan, prescribed, top-down, company mindset is who we are. So it's more of a bottoms-up approach, and good ideas are coming from any part of the organization, and there's no shortage of dissent, which is healthy in the sense that you're trying to argue and really understand each other's point of view. It's not negative. It's constructive. And then the end of all that, we really have to be clear on what our mission is. And so you have all of this activity and staying focused on delivering something which is an aggregate output of combined effort, and we can't be slightly divergent. So there's great challenge in bringing that kind of meritocracy, although the word's sort of fallen out of favor, but that sort of any idea can come from anywhere. It's really the value of the idea that matters, not who produced it, and the ability to influence and pull people in a direction and really gather that momentum is core to who we are.
So walk us through that operationally. There's a new business opportunity you want to go into. There's a new product opportunity. You need a new division. You have goals of 20% growth this year or 10% or whatever. How's that function? How's that work?
Well, one thing we've done is created for ourselves a way of making decisions. We call it the Open Decision Framework. It's available, it's online. And that is set out with some sort of a hypothesis. We want to enter a new business, or we need to make a decision. We solicit input from a broad set of constituents, in some cases the entire company. Now, it's not total democracy where everybody has a vote. It's really about gathering the broadest amount of input, because it's the diversity of ideas that generates the best ideas. And ultimately, we need to have a mechanism for time boxing the conversation, because in the open source world, there's a notion of bike shedding, which is, you could argue about the most mundane comment or idea forever, and that's the color of the bike shed, without ever getting to the core of the real problem. So time box the problem or the discussion, and really have a key understanding of who is the owner of the ultimate decision, and we're taking input, not trying to have everybody involved in every decision. And that's a core part of how we operate, that sort of open framework, getting people's ideas. I'm a firm believer in that the broader the set of diversity that you use to bring in ideas, the better the ideas that you'll generate. And so we try to operate that way. And I think it's really reflective of open source communities, where in a certain sense, initiative is what drives action. So somebody steps up and does something, that's much more powerful than talking about it. And then you can argue about the details when those matter, but it's getting the direction stated. And
So talk about some of the results of that. How's that help drive growth?
That's a good question. A part of it is just how we operate. So it's, growth becomes one of our strategic imperatives. How do we grow? So we'll put together forecasting annual plans about what are we going to do to drive that growth. And then we're trying to onboard people onto those ideas to make sure that everybody, whether it's a developer writing a line of code or a person in the field selling a product, has the same strategic vision. Because that's the real challenge. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're just even slightly divergent over time, you're pulling against each other. And so that part of that open decision-making framework is the gathering of ideas. Part of it is a subtle reverse of that, which is you're slowly creating influence and trying to create a shared vision. You're not going to be effective without a shared vision.
Cool. And I realize this is Traction Conference, and it's about startups that are looking to gain traction. So there's lots of growth and financing and marketing types of questions that get discussed on this stage. But it would really suck to have the CTO of Red Hat here and not talk about some of the scaling things from a technological perspective that new technologies are enabling. Can you talk about that a little bit in terms of some of the new technology you brought out, some of the containerization things that we've seen, the cloud things that have been around for some time as well, but the things that technology, where technology is right now, where it's going in the next 18 months or so, that's helping tech companies scale quickly?
I think the two areas that are most important right now are the ability to rapidly build code, and so that's DevOps, CI/CD pipelines, all the stuff that you've been hearing about for a number of years, and then deploy that code into production as quickly as possible. And containers become a core component of that. So containerizing an application, decomposing application concepts into smaller and smaller pieces, traditionally called or contemporarily called microservices, which it's a little bit of a buzzword, but the point is you're doing small amounts of work with a small team. That is part of what allows you to move quickly. And then having some independence in where you might actually run your infrastructure and your workloads, whether it's across any of the major public cloud vendors, whether you're doing stuff internally on premise and in a data center. So we talk about the hybrid cloud, and the hybrid cloud is largely built from containers and allowing you to do this deployment across any different infrastructure footprint. I think the other critical piece, so you got the speed and agility that goes along with sort of DevOps and containerization and independence of where you deploy. The other big piece is data, and everybody is looking at how they can derive value from data. And bringing data and applications closer and closer together is part of what we're doing with Kubernetes, which is a container orchestration platform. It's one of the first times in the industry where we have the ability to take a set of different types of distributed systems and use the same infrastructure to manage them all. So you don't have a distributed scheduler here and a cluster manager there. It's all consolidated into one core orchestration tool. And ultimately, we're trying to bring in hardware acceleration to really support machine learning workloads so that you can get, from an infrastructure point of view, self-tuning, self-optimizing, self-driving clusters, if you will. And from a business point of view, direct access to real-time data to make value decisions that are really going to impact your revenue. And certainly, in there, there's more and more software operated as a service, and those are probably some of your businesses here. So I think machine learning, that hybrid cloud, which is interestingly going to include the edge more and more, and containers.
Excellent, excellent. That was pretty succinct, actually, and really, really well done. Couple seconds left. Acquisition, IBM, new company, maybe new corporate structure, at least at the top. How's that going to impact what you're doing? How do you feel about it?
Number one, Red Hat will remain Red Hat. We have already worked through some agreements of how we'll create some level of independence. It's fundamental to us that we are focused on our platform portfolio strategy, and a big part of that is neutrality and building a large ecosystem, because the platform is only as valuable as itself plus the ecosystem around it. So if we're suddenly over-rotated towards one partner, essentially IBM, then that would really neutralize the value of a neutral platform. And we're looking to help get scale through their business. But I think there's also some opportunities for us to take our open org and our kind of cultural style and influence a little bit of how IBM operates. So we'll retain independence. We need our brand identity to stay the way it is. But I see there's actually some really, really cool opportunities to expand and grow and even influence a major tech company.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I need some traction. You need some traction. Let's get some traction.